Hello there, dear listeners and history enthusiasts. Before we embark on today's fascinating journey through medieval romance, I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. Whether it's morning coffee time in New York, afternoon tea in London, or evening wind down in Tokyo, I'm delighted you've chosen to spend this time with us, exploring the captivating world of history. If you're new to History Tales, please consider subscribing to join our growing community of history lovers who discover the untold stories that shaped our world. Forget candlelit dinners and swiping right. In the Middle Ages, love was a tapestry woven from tradition, religion, survival, and the occasional thread of genuine romance that somehow managed to shine through centuries of social convention. Between the 5th and 15th centuries, spanning nearly a millennium of human experience, love could be a noble pursuit, worthy of epic poetry, a dangerous scandal that could destroy entire families, or simply a calculated transaction of power disguised in wedding finery. Picture a world where your heart's desire mattered far less than your father's political ambitions, where a stolen kiss could lead to exile or execution, and where the greatest love stories were often born from the very constraints that sought to suppress them. This was medieval romance, complex, contradictory, and utterly captivating in its raw humanity. Was love in the Middle Ages truly romantic, or merely strategic? The answer, like most things in history, is beautifully complicated. Join me as we journey through castle halls and peasant cottages, monastery gardens and market squares, to uncover the truth about how our ancestors loved, longed, and sometimes lost everything in pursuit of the human heart's most enduring mystery. In the medieval world, marriage was rarely about butterflies in your stomach or finding your soulmate. It was, quite frankly, business, serious business that could determine the fate of kingdoms, secure vast fortunes, or mean the difference between survival and starvation for common folk. Among the nobility, marriage served as the ultimate diplomatic tool. When King Edward I of England arranged his daughter's marriage to the heir of Scotland, he wasn't thinking about her happiness. He was thinking about unifying two kingdoms under English rule. Noble families spent years negotiating marriage alliances that would strengthen their political positions, expand their territories, or settle ancient feuds. These weren't romantic comedies, they were corporate mergers with crowns and coats of arms. The language of noble marriage contracts reads like modern business agreements. Upon this union, the bride shall bring forth lands comprising 300 acres, 2 mills, and the rights to all fishing waters within the eastern boundaries. Love, if mentioned at all, appeared as a polite afterthought, somewhere between the dowry specifications and the inheritance clauses. For landed gentry, marriage meant consolidating wealth and ensuring property stayed within acceptable bloodlines. A daughter was essentially a valuable asset to be invested wisely. Her marriage could elevate the family's status, secure trade partnerships, or gain powerful allies in times of conflict. The pressure on families to make advantageous matches was enormous. A poor marriage choice could doom future generations to poverty or political irrelevance. Among the peasantry, marriage served different but equally practical purposes. For common folk working the land, marriage was about survival and labour distribution. A husband and wife formed an economic partnership essential for managing the demanding cycle of agricultural life. During planting season, harvest time, or when raising livestock, every pair of hands mattered. Children weren't just bundles of joy, they were future workers who would help sustain the family farm and care for ageing parents. Peasant marriages often reflected careful calculations about complementary skills. A blacksmith's daughter might marry a farmer's son, combining metalworking capabilities with agricultural knowledge to create a more prosperous household. A widow with established bread-baking skills might remarry quickly to a man who could provide grain and protection. forming a partnership beneficial to both parties and their children. The Catholic Church's growing influence during the medieval period fundamentally transformed marriage from a primarily secular contract into a sacred sacrament. By the 12th century, the Church had established marriage as one of 7 holy sacraments, declaring it indissoluble except under very specific circumstances. This religious framework added layers of complexity to an already complicated institution. Church doctrine emphasised that marriage should be entered into freely by both parties, a revolutionary concept that often clashed with family expectations and social pressures. However, freely remained relative when families controlled every aspect of young people's lives, including their access to potential partners, financial resources, and social connections. The Church also introduced the concept that marriage existed for 3 primary purposes: procreation, preventing sin through legitimate sexual expression, and mutual support between spouses. While this didn't necessarily promote romantic love, it did acknowledge that marriage should involve more than mere political convenience, a small but significant step toward recognising the human elements of matrimonial bonds. Religious authorities became deeply involved in regulating marriage practices, establishing rules about consanguinity that prevented marriages between relatives, setting minimum ages for matrimony, and creating elaborate ceremonies that sanctified the union before God and community. These religious requirements often conflicted with practical family arrangements, leading to complex negotiations between spiritual ideals and worldly necessities. The transformation of marriage into a sacrament also meant that divorce became nearly impossible, making the initial choice of partner even more crucial. Annulments required proving the marriage was invalid from the beginning, perhaps due to coercion, undisclosed previous marriages, or close blood relationships, creating a legal and religious minefield that wealthy families learned to navigate, while common folk remained trapped in unsuitable unions. Despite these practical and religious constraints, evidence suggests that many medieval marriages did develop into partnerships characterized by mutual affection and respect. Surviving letters between spouses reveal genuine care, concern during illnesses, grief at separation, and joy in reunion. While passion might not have sparked these unions, companionate love often grew from shared experiences, mutual dependence, and the simple human capacity to find warmth in even the most pragmatically arranged circumstances. Noble courtship in the medieval period was an elaborate dance of diplomacy, desire, and social display that bore little resemblance to modern dating. These ritualized romantic pursuits could span years, involving multiple families, political considerations, and enough protocol to fill several etiquette manuals. Yet within these rigid structures, genuine affection sometimes bloomed like roses growing through castle stone. The courtship process among nobility typically began long before the potential couple ever laid eyes on each other. Families would initiate discussions about suitable matches when children were still quite young, sometimes in infancy. These preliminary negotiations involved careful evaluation of bloodlines, land holdings, political alliances, and potential future benefits. Marriage brokers, often trusted family retainers or church officials, facilitated these discussions with the discretion of modern diplomatic envoys. Once a potential match was identified and initial agreements reached, the formal courtship could begin. This process was heavily chaperoned, reflecting both the high stakes involved and medieval concerns about protecting feminine virtue. Young noble women were never left alone with suitors. Instead, meetings occurred in grand halls filled with family members, servants, and other witnesses who ensured propriety while evaluating the developing relationship. gift-giving formed a central element of noble courtship, but these weren't simple tokens of affection. Each present carried symbolic meaning and represented significant financial investments. Rings might feature precious gems whose colours conveyed specific messages: sapphires for loyalty, emeralds for hope, rubies for passion, carefully contained within appropriate bounds. Elaborately decorated prayer books demonstrated both wealth and religious devotion. Silk ribbons in family colours could be worn as visible signs of connection between houses. The most prized gifts were often practical items enhanced with artistic beauty. A nobleman might present his intended bride with a magnificently carved ivory mirror, combining utility with luxury while symbolising his desire for her to see herself as he saw her, beautiful and worthy of costly adornment. Illuminated manuscripts containing romantic poetry or religious texts showed both literary sophistication and spiritual commitment. The rise of courtly love culture in 12th century France revolutionised noble courtship by introducing concepts of romantic devotion that elevated women to previously unknown heights of veneration. This cultural movement, heavily influenced by Islamic poetry from Spain and Crusader contacts with Byzantine romance traditions, created an entirely new vocabulary for expressing noble affection. Courtly love emphasised the ennobling power of romantic devotion, suggesting that love for a worthy lady could inspire men to achieve great deeds of valour, poetry, and spiritual development. Knights would declare themselves devoted servants of particular noblewomen, dedicating their tournament victories, military achievements, and artistic endeavours to their chosen ladies. This created a formalised system of romantic homage that operated parallel to, and sometimes in tension with, practical marriage negotiations. The troubadour tradition that accompanied courtly love produced some of the most sophisticated romantic poetry in medieval literature. These poet-musicians, often minor nobles themselves, composed elaborate verses celebrating the beauty, virtue, and inspiring power of noble ladies. Their songs described the sweet agony of unrequited love, the joy of receiving small tokens of favour, and the spiritual transformation that came from devoted service to an idealised beloved. However, courtly love contained inherent contradictions that reflected the tensions within medieval noble society. Many courtly romance narratives involved married women as the objects of devotion, creating a literary tradition that celebrated adulterous longing while officially upholding marriage's sacred nature. This allowed for the exploration of passionate emotion within a framework that didn't directly threaten social stability, since the love remained largely theoretical and unfulfilled. The chaste devotion emphasised in courtly love culture created space for emotional intimacy that transcended purely physical attraction. Knights and ladies could engage in lengthy correspondence, exchange poetry, and develop deep intellectual connections while maintaining appropriate social boundaries. This emotional courtship could be incredibly intense, involving years of carefully orchestrated encounters, meaningful glances across crowded halls, and the exquisite pleasure of receiving small signs of favour, a flower worn in specific placement, a particular song requested from musicians, or a meaningful pause in conversation. Secret signs and coded communications became essential elements of noble courtship. Lovers developed elaborate systems of symbolic communication that allowed them to express feelings while maintaining plausible deniability if questioned by family members or rivals. The language of flowers reached sophisticated levels. Specific blooms carried distinct meanings that could convey everything from initial interest to deep commitment to gentle rejection. Dance provided another crucial courtship venue where physical proximity was socially acceptable. The formal dances popular in noble courts required partners to hold hands, maintain eye contact, and move in synchronized patterns that created intimate moments within public settings. Skilled dancers could convey volumes through subtle pressure of fingers, timing of steps, and the intensity of their gaze during prescribed moments of connection. Yet for all its romantic elaboration, noble courtship remained ultimately subject to family approval and political necessity. Many of the most passionate courtly love affairs remained unconsummated, not just due to virtue, but because actual marriage between the lovers would have been politically impossible or economically disastrous. The system allowed for emotional satisfaction while preserving practical family interests, a sophisticated solution to the eternal tension between heart and duty. While nobles conducted their elaborate courtships in castle halls, common folk developed their own rich traditions of romance that were more spontaneous, community-centred, and refreshingly direct. Peasant courtship might have lacked the formal protocols of aristocratic romance, but it possessed an authenticity and warmth that often resulted in genuinely affectionate marriages based on mutual choice and shared values. The social calendar of medieval villages provided natural opportunities for young people to meet and evaluate potential partners. Seasonal festivals celebrating harvest, planting, or religious holidays brought entire communities together for days of shared labour, followed by evenings of music, dancing, and storytelling. These gatherings allowed young men and women to observe each other in various contexts, working together during communal tasks, demonstrating skills during competitions, and revealing personality traits through social interactions. Market days held special significance for rural courtship. When farmers brought their goods to town for trade, young people from scattered farms and villages converged in central locations where they could meet potential partners from other communities. These market encounters broadened the pool of possible matches beyond immediate neighbours, while providing practical opportunities to assess compatibility. A young woman's skill at bargaining for fair prices, or a young man's reputation among fellow traders, could significantly influence romantic prospects. Church gatherings served dual purposes in peasant courtship, combining spiritual observance with social opportunity. While families attended services together, young people could discreetly observe potential partners from other households. Church festivals and Saints' Day celebrations often included community feasts and dancing that provided more relaxed settings for conversation and connection. Religious pilgrimages to local shrines created opportunities for extended interaction between young people from different areas. The practice of bundling represented one of the most distinctive aspects of common folk courtship, demonstrating a practical approach to premarital intimacy that balanced community moral standards with recognition of human nature. When a young couple's courtship reached serious stages, they might be permitted to spend entire nights together in the woman's family home, lying fully clothed on a bed separated by a wooden board or wrapped in separate blankets or sacks. This custom served multiple purposes within peasant society. It allowed couples extensive time for private conversation and emotional bonding without the elaborate chaperoning required among nobility. Young people could discuss their hopes, fears, plans for the future, and compatibility on practical matters like farming, child rearing, and household management. The physical proximity created intimacy, while community enforced boundaries maintained technical virtue. Bundling also served as a practical courtship test. Couples who could spend entire nights together talking, sharing warmth during cold weather, and maintaining appropriate behaviour demonstrated the self-control and mutual respect essential for successful marriage. Those who couldn't handle the temptation or proved incompatible during extended close contact could end their courtship before making more formal commitments. Community approval played a crucial role in peasant romance that was both more democratic and more invasive than noble courtship practices. Village neighbours observed developing relationships with keen interest, offering opinions, spreading gossip, and sometimes actively interfering in matches they considered unsuitable. This collective involvement could be supportive. Neighbours might arrange opportunities for shy young people to meet or provide practical assistance to promising couples, but it could also be suffocating. Village elders, often including the local priest, frequently served as informal matchmakers and relationship counsellors. They possessed detailed knowledge of family histories, individual temperaments, and practical considerations that affected marriage prospects. Their blessing could smooth the path for young couples, while their disapproval could create significant obstacles. This community involvement ensured marriages supported village stability and harmony, but sometimes at the cost of individual preference. The exchange of tokens and gifts among common folk reflected their practical circumstances while maintaining romantic significance. A young farmer might carve a wooden comb or spindle for his intended bride, demonstrating both affection and useful skill. Women showed favour through practical gifts like knitted mittens, embroidered kerchiefs, or special foods prepared for their suitors. These presents combined romantic gesture with utilitarian value, reflecting the integration of love and practical necessity in peasant life. Seasonal work provided natural opportunities for courtship evaluation. During harvest time, when entire communities laboured together, bringing in crops, young people could observe potential partners' work ethic, stamina, and ability to cooperate effectively with others. Sheep shearing, apple picking, or grain threshing became informal courtship settings where practical skills were demonstrated alongside personal qualities. The relative freedom enjoyed by peasant women in choosing marriage partners, compared to their noble counterparts, created space for relationships based on mutual attraction and compatibility. While families certainly influenced decisions and economic considerations mattered, common folk couples often had final say over their own marriages. This freedom produced unions where affection and partnership could develop more naturally from the beginning. Seasonal celebrations unique to rural life created special courtship opportunities. May Day festivities, with their emphasis on fertility and renewal, encouraged romantic pairing through traditional dances and games. Harvest festivals celebrating successful crops provided context for demonstrating prosperity and planning ability. Winter celebrations during the darkest months emphasised the importance of companionship and mutual support through difficult times. Despite their relative simplicity compared to noble courtship rituals, peasant romance traditions possessed sophistication and meaning that served their communities well. The emphasis on practical compatibility, community integration, and genuine affection created marriages that functioned effectively within the demanding circumstances of medieval rural life, while providing emotional satisfaction for the couples involved. Medieval society's attempts to regulate love and sexuality created a complex web of rules, restrictions, and inevitable scandals that reveal both the period's moral anxieties and the persistent power of human desire to transcend social boundaries. The clash between official standards and actual behaviour generated some of the most dramatic and tragic stories of the entire medieval era. The Catholic Church wielded enormous influence over sexual morality, establishing comprehensive doctrines that governed every aspect of romantic and marital behaviour. Church teaching emphasised that sexual activity should occur only within marriage and primarily for procreation. Premarital intimacy was officially condemned as sinful, requiring confession and penance. However, the reality of medieval life often diverged dramatically from these ideals, creating constant tension between moral law and human nature. Despite official condemnation, Premarital sexual relationships were remarkably common across all social levels. Church records reveal frequent penances assigned for fornication, indicating that young people regularly engaged in intimate relationships before marriage. Village life provided numerous opportunities for private encounters during seasonal work in isolated fields, while tending livestock in distant pastures, or during long winter evenings when families gathered closely for warmth and storytelling. The Church's solution to widespread premarital sexuality involved creating multiple categories of marriage recognition. Clandestine marriages performed without official church ceremony, but witnessed by the community, were reluctantly recognised as valid, providing legitimacy for couples who had already consummated their relationships. This practical compromise allowed church authorities to maintain moral standards while accommodating social reality. Class barriers created some of the most insurmountable restrictions on medieval romance, generating tragic stories that captured popular imagination for centuries. The social gulf between nobility and commoners was considered divinely ordained and absolutely inviolable. A noblewoman who married beneath her station faced complete social ostracism, loss of inheritance rights, and potential violence from outraged family members. Such unions were considered not merely inappropriate, but genuinely threatening to social order. The famous romance between Heloise, a brilliant scholar from a minor noble family, and Peter Abelard, her common-born tutor, illustrates the devastating consequences of crossing class boundaries. Despite their profound intellectual connection and passionate love, their secret marriage and subsequent child created a scandal that destroyed Abelard's career, led to his violent castration by Heloise's relatives, and forced both lovers into monastic life. Their surviving letters reveal both the intensity of cross-class attraction and the brutal social mechanisms that crushed such relationships. Regional variations in class restrictions created additional complications. What might be barely acceptable in one area could be absolutely forbidden in another, depending on local power structures and traditional practices. Merchants' daughters who might marry minor nobles in commercially oriented Italian city-states would face rejection in areas where military service and ancient bloodlines determined social status. Forbidden romances involving clergy generated particularly intense scandals due to the Church's increasing emphasis on clerical celibacy. While early medieval priests had often married openly, reform movements of the 11th and 12th centuries established mandatory celibacy for all clergy above the rank of deacon. This created enormous tension as existing married priests were forced to abandon their families, and new clergy struggled with vows that denied fundamental human desires. Monastic communities, despite their dedication to spiritual pursuits, frequently became settings for romantic drama. The concentration of young, educated, and often aristocratic individuals in close quarters inevitably led to emotional attachments that violated religious vows. Letters and chronicles reveal numerous scandals involving monks and nuns who formed romantic relationships, sometimes leading to secret marriages or children born in violation of religious commitments. The famous affair between the monk Abelard and his former student Heloise occurred after both had entered religious life, demonstrating how romantic passion could persist even within monastic walls. Their correspondence reveals the ongoing tension between spiritual dedication and persistent human love, as both struggled to reconcile their religious vows with their undeniable emotional connection. Adultery among married nobility created particularly complex scandals that could trigger wars, inheritance disputes, and political realignments. Since noble marriages were essentially political alliances, adultery represented not just personal betrayal, but potential treason against family interests. The discovery of extramarital affairs could void marriage contracts, disinherit children, and destroy carefully constructed political relationships. The legendary affair between Queen Guinevere and Sir Lancelot in Arthurian romance reflects real concerns about adultery's destructive potential within feudal society. While Arthur's court was fictional, the story's enduring popularity demonstrated contemporary anxieties about how romantic passion could undermine political stability and social order. Inheritance laws created additional restrictions that particularly affected women's romantic choices. Since property typically passed through male lines, daughters represented potential threats to family wealth if they married inappropriately. Fathers maintained legal control over daughters' marriages well into their adult years, and women who defied paternal authority could be completely disinherited or even imprisoned until they accepted suitable matches. The legal concept of disparagement allowed families to void marriages they considered beneath their social station, regardless of the participants' wishes. This law was frequently invoked when young nobles eloped with inappropriate partners, providing families legal mechanisms to dissolve unwanted unions and punish rebellious children. Seasonal restrictions also governed medieval romance and marriage. The Church prohibited weddings during Lent, Advent, and various other religious seasons, creating periods when romantic relationships could develop but not be formalised. These restrictions sometimes led to awkward situations where couples had to wait months to legitimise relationships that had already become intimate, increasing the likelihood of premarital pregnancy and associated scandals. Despite all these restrictions, medieval society also provided surprising outlets for romantic expression that operated within acceptable bounds. Courtly love traditions allowed for intense emotional relationships that remained technically chaste. Religious mysticism created space for passionate spiritual devotion that sometimes barely distinguished between divine and human love objects. Literary traditions celebrated romantic ideals while providing cautionary tales about the consequences of violating social norms. In medieval society, finding a suitable marriage partner was far too important to leave to chance encounters or youthful passion. The institution of matchmaking developed into a sophisticated network of professional intermediaries, family strategists, and community facilitators who specialised in creating unions that served multiple interests while hopefully producing some measure of personal compatibility. Professional matchmakers occupied a unique position in medieval society, possessing intimate knowledge of family histories, financial situations, and personal characteristics across wide geographic areas. These individuals, often older women with extensive social connections, maintained detailed mental catalogues of available partners, family reputations, and potential obstacles to successful unions. Their expertise was particularly valued by merchant families and minor nobility who lacked the extensive kinship networks of great aristocratic houses. The most successful matchmakers combined practical knowledge with psychological insight, understanding that successful marriages required more than just financial compatibility. They evaluated personality types, family dynamics, and individual temperaments to identify couples likely to develop mutual affection alongside their practical partnership. A skilled matchmaker might recognise that a shy younger son needed a confident bride who could help him manage estate responsibilities, or that a strong-willed daughter required a husband secure enough in his own authority to appreciate rather than suppress her capabilities. Matchmaking services extended beyond simple introductions to include complex negotiation of marriage terms. These intermediaries often spent months working out details of dowries, inheritance rights, property transfers, and household management arrangements. Their expertise in marriage law and local customs proved invaluable in avoiding disputes that could destroy promising matches or create long-term family conflicts. The Catholic Church's requirement that marriages be entered into freely by both parties created interesting tensions with family-arranged matches. Skilled matchmakers learned to navigate these requirements by ensuring that young people felt they had genuine choice, even within carefully orchestrated circumstances. They might arrange seemingly casual encounters at markets or festivals, facilitate correspondence that allowed couples to develop emotional connections before formal negotiations began, or provide opportunities for extended interaction that let compatibility develop naturally. Family involvement in medieval matchmaking reflected both economic necessity and genuine concern for children's welfare within a harsh and unpredictable world. Parents who had survived plagues, famines, wars and economic disasters understood that marriage represented their children's primary source of security and support. Their insistence on controlling marriage decisions came from hard-won knowledge of how quickly circumstances could change and how important it was to have reliable family alliances. Aristocratic families approached matchmaking as a form of long-term strategic planning that could span generations. Great noble houses maintained detailed genealogies and political analyses that informed marriage decisions for decades in advance. They might betroth children in infancy to secure crucial alliances, then spend years carefully managing the relationship between families to ensure the eventual marriage would achieve its intended purposes. The negotiation of marriage contracts among wealthy families resembled modern corporate mergers in their complexity and attention to detail. Teams of legal experts, family advisors, and religious authorities would spend months crafting agreements that addressed every conceivable contingency. These contracts specified not just immediate financial arrangements, but also inheritance rights, guardianship provisions for potential children, widows' maintenance, and dissolution procedures should the marriage fail. Dowry negotiations formed the centrepiece of most aristocratic matchmaking efforts. The bride's family was expected to provide substantial property, money, or valuable goods that would support the new household and demonstrate their commitment to the match. However, dowries weren't simple payments. They represented complex financial instruments that remained under various forms of family control even after marriage, providing ongoing influence over the couple's decisions and welfare. The practice of bride price in some regions created mirror obligations for grooms' families, who had to demonstrate their ability to support wives and any resulting children. These payments served as insurance policies, ensuring that brides would be treated well and provided for appropriately. Families that failed to meet bride price obligations could find their marriage contracts voided and their reputations damaged throughout their social networks. Middle-class families, including successful merchants and skilled artisans, developed their own matchmaking traditions that balanced practical considerations with emerging concepts of companionate marriage. These families often had more flexibility than either great nobles or poor peasants, possessing enough resources to consider emotional compatibility while still needing marriages that supported business interests and social advancement. Guild systems created natural matchmaking networks within urban communities. Master craftsmen often arranged marriages between their apprentices and daughters, creating business partnerships that combined romantic relationships with professional training. These unions could be remarkably successful as couples shared common interests, understood each other's work demands, and possessed complementary skills that strengthened both their personal relationship and economic prospects. Young people's resistance to family-arranged matches created ongoing tensions that families addressed through various compromise strategies. Some parents learned to present multiple acceptable options, allowing children to feel they were making genuine choices within pre-approved parameters. Others involved children in the matchmaking process from early ages, teaching them to evaluate potential partners according to family values while respecting their emotional preferences. The role of extended family in matchmaking extended far beyond immediate parents to include grandparents, aunts, uncles, and trusted family friends who served as informal scouts and advisors. These networks could identify promising matches across wide geographic areas, provide detailed intelligence about potential partners' families, and offer ongoing support for developing relationships. Large kinship networks gave families significant advantages in the competitive medieval marriage market. Religious considerations added another layer of complexity to family matchmaking efforts. Canon law prohibited marriages between relatives within several degrees of consanguinity, requiring families to maintain detailed genealogical records and seek church approval for unions that might violate these restrictions. Some families discovered that desired matches were impossible due to previously unknown family connections, while others exploited dubious kinship claims to escape unwanted marriage obligations. The timing of matchmaking efforts reflected family strategic thinking about optimal ages for marriage, seasonal considerations, and broader political circumstances. Families might delay marriages during periods of political instability, accelerate negotiations when advantageous opportunities arose, or coordinate multiple family marriages to maximize their collective influence and security. The medieval period witnessed a revolutionary development in romantic communication through the rise of written correspondence, transforming how educated lovers could express their feelings and maintain relationships across distance and time. Love letters became both literary art form and practical necessity, creating a rich documentary record of medieval romance that reveals the sophisticated emotional lives hidden behind formal social structures. Literacy among the medieval elite opened entirely new possibilities for romantic expression that transcended the limitations of brief, chaperoned encounters. Young nobles could spend hours crafting carefully worded letters that revealed their intelligence, education, and emotional depth in ways impossible during formal courtship visits. These written exchanges allowed for the development of profound intellectual intimacy that often became the foundation for lasting affectionate marriages. The art of love letter composition became an essential aristocratic skill taught alongside music, dancing, and military training. Young nobles studied classical models from Latin poets, like Ovid, learned rhetorical techniques for persuasive writing, and practiced elaborate metaphorical language that could express passionate feelings while maintaining appropriate decorum. The ability to write compelling love letters was considered a mark of refinement and sophistication that enhanced marriage prospects significantly. Medieval love letters employed complex symbolic vocabularies that allowed lovers to communicate intense emotions while protecting themselves from scandal if their correspondence was discovered. Religious imagery provided particularly rich metaphorical resources. The beloved could be described as an angel bringing divine grace, a sacred shrine worthy of pilgrimage, or a guiding star leading the lover towards spiritual enlightenment. These religious comparisons elevated romantic feeling to spiritual heights while maintaining plausible innocence. The practical challenges of medieval letter exchange created additional romantic intensity through the anticipation and uncertainty involved in long-distance communication. Letters carried by unreliable messengers could take weeks or months to reach their destinations, creating extended periods of anxiety and hope that heightened emotional investment in relationships. The eventual arrival of correspondence became occasions of intense joy or devastating disappointment that modern instant communication can hardly replicate. Surviving letters between medieval couples reveal remarkable emotional sophistication and psychological insight. Correspondents discussed not just their romantic feelings, but their fears, ambitions, spiritual struggles, and intellectual interests. These exchanges created deep personal knowledge that often made arranged marriages surprisingly successful, as couples entered matrimony already possessing intimate understanding of each other's inner lives. The famous correspondence between Peter Abelard and Heloise represents the pinnacle of medieval romantic letter writing, combining passionate personal expression with sophisticated theological and philosophical discourse. Their letters, written after both had entered monastic life, reveal how intellectual equals could maintain profound emotional connection through written communication even when separated by religious vows and physical distance. Their correspondence influenced romantic ideals for centuries, demonstrating how love could transcend immediate physical circumstances through the power of written expression. Medieval romantic literature, particularly the epic tales that emerged from troubadour traditions, created cultural templates for understanding and expressing love that influenced actual courtship practices. Stories like Tristan and Isolde provided vocabularies for describing romantic experience and models for romantic behaviour that young nobles consciously emulated in their own relationships. The legend of Tristan and Isolde embodied many of the tensions and contradictions inherent in medieval romance culture. Their story celebrated passionate love, while acknowledging its destructive potential, honoured devotion that transcended marriage vows, while recognising the social chaos such relationships could create. The tale's enduring popularity reflected medieval society's fascination with a romantic passion that operated outside acceptable social boundaries while remaining ultimately tragic and cautionary. The character of Isolde represented a new kind of medieval feminine ideal, a woman whose beauty and virtue inspired overwhelming devotion, but whose love brought both ecstasy and destruction to those who pursued it. This literary archetype influenced how real women understood their own romantic power, and how men conceptualized the experience of falling deeply in love. The Isolde model suggested that true love was necessarily tragic, creating romantic expectations that often became self-fulfilling prophecies. Troubadour culture produced hundreds of sophisticated romantic ballads that were performed at noble courts throughout Europe, spreading common romantic vocabularies and ideals across linguistic and political boundaries. These professional poet-musicians created a shared cultural language for expressing romantic experience that influenced how people across medieval Europe understood and articulated their own emotional lives. The Alba or Dawn song became particularly popular as a poetic form celebrating clandestine romantic encounters. These pieces typically described lovers forced to part at daybreak, emphasizing the bittersweet tension between romantic fulfillment and social necessity. The Alba tradition normalized the concept of secret romantic relationships while maintaining their essentially temporary and forbidden nature. Many troubadour compositions were commissioned by noble patrons who wanted their own romantic experiences immortalized in verse, creating personalized romantic literature that celebrated actual relationships while transforming them into artistic achievements. This patronage system encouraged the development of increasingly sophisticated poetic techniques for expressing romantic emotion while providing economic support for professional romantic poets. The rise of vernacular literature in various European languages democratized romantic expression by making sophisticated love poetry accessible to broader audiences. While Latin remained the language of church and scholarship, romantic literature in French, German, Italian, and other regional languages could reach merchants, skilled artisans, and minor nobles who possessed basic literacy but lacked extensive classical education. The Arthurian romance cycle, particularly the stories surrounding Lancelot and Guinevere, provided medieval audiences with extended explorations of the relationship between romantic love and social duty. These tales examined how passionate attachment could conflict with feudal loyalty, marriage vows, and political necessity, offering complex moral lessons about the consequences of placing personal desire above social obligations. Regional variations in romantic literature reflected different cultural attitudes toward love and marriage across medieval Europe. Italian poetry emphasized the spiritual elevation achieved through romantic devotion. German literature often focused on the tragic consequences of transgressing social boundaries, while French romances typically celebrated the ennobling effects of courtly service to worthy ladies. The preservation of romantic letters and literature from the medieval period provides modern readers with intimate access to emotional lives that official historical records rarely reveal. These personal documents demonstrate that medieval people experienced the full range of human romantic emotions: passion, jealousy, devotion, heartbreak, and joy, with the same intensity familiar to contemporary lovers, despite vastly different social circumstances. As the medieval period drew to a close during the 15th century, the foundations of European society were shifting in ways that would fundamentally transform approaches to love and marriage. The emergence of Renaissance humanism, the growth of urban commerce, and changing religious perspectives combined to create new possibilities for romantic relationships that emphasized individual choice and emotional fulfillment alongside traditional practical considerations. The Renaissance emphasis on individual worth and personal achievement began to challenge medieval assumptions about fixed social hierarchies and predetermined life paths. Humanist philosophers argued that personal merit and individual accomplishments should influence social position more than accident of birth, creating intellectual framework for marriages based on personal compatibility, rather than solely on family alliances and inherited status. Urban commercial growth created new social classes that didn't fit neatly into traditional feudal categories, generating fresh approaches to marriage and courtship. Successful merchants could achieve wealth rivaling that of ancient noble families while maintaining different values that emphasized practical achievement over aristocratic lineage. These nouveau riche families often prioritized marriages that combined emotional satisfaction with business advancement, creating more flexible attitudes toward romantic choice. The Protestant Reformation's challenge to Catholic religious authority extended to questioning church control over marriage practices. Protestant reformers argued for clerical marriage, simplified wedding ceremonies, and greater individual responsibility in choosing spouses. While these changes developed primarily in the 16th century, their intellectual foundations were laid during the late medieval period, as critics began questioning comprehensive church authority over personal relationships. Increased literacy and the advent of printing technology democratized access to romantic literature and correspondence, allowing broader segments of society to participate in sophisticated romantic culture, previously limited to the educated elite. Printed books made courtly romance stories available to merchant families and skilled artisans, spreading aristocratic romantic ideals throughout urban society while encouraging more elaborate courtship practices among the middle classes. The gradual decline of feudalism's rigid social structure created opportunities for social mobility that made cross-class marriages slightly more feasible, though still challenging. Successful merchants could purchase noble titles or marry their children into cash-poor aristocratic families, creating new pathways for romantic relationships that had been impossible during the height of medieval social stratification. Women's social position began experiencing subtle changes during the late medieval period that would significantly influence romantic relationships. The growth of urban economies created new occupational opportunities for women in trade, crafts and service industries, providing alternatives to marriage as the sole source of economic security. This independence gave some women greater leverage in marriage negotiations and the ability to delay marriage until finding more compatible partners. The rise of university education during the later medieval period created new communities of educated individuals who valued intellectual compatibility alongside traditional marriage considerations. Universities brought together young people from diverse geographic and social backgrounds, creating opportunities for relationships based on shared academic interests and intellectual pursuits, rather than purely on family connections. By the late 15th century, evidence suggests that personal affection was becoming a more important factor in marriage decisions, even among nobility. While practical considerations remained paramount, families increasingly recognised that marriages based on mutual respect and emotional compatibility were more likely to produce stable households and successful partnerships. This shift reflected both changing cultural values and practical experience, demonstrating that purely strategic marriages often fail to achieve their intended purposes. The concept of companionate marriage began emerging during this transitional period, emphasizing partnership, mutual support, and emotional intimacy alongside traditional roles and responsibilities. This ideal suggested that spouses should be friends and companions, as well as economic partners and parents, creating new expectations for marital relationships that would become increasingly important in subsequent centuries. Regional variations in these changing attitudes reflected different economic and political circumstances across Europe. Italian city-states, with their commercial focus and Renaissance cultural innovations, often led in developing more flexible marriage practices. Northern European regions, with stronger feudal traditions and conservative religious influences, changed more slowly, while still experiencing gradual shifts toward greater individual choice. As we reach the end of our journey through medieval love and romance, the contrasts with modern dating practices seem almost overwhelming. Where we have dating apps and casual coffee meetings, they had elaborate family negotiations and chaperoned encounters. Where we prioritize personal happiness and emotional fulfillment, they balanced survival, political alliances, and social stability. Where we can marry across class lines and choose our own partners, they navigated rigid hierarchies and family expectations that left little room for individual preference. Yet beneath these dramatic differences in practice, the fundamental human experiences of attraction, longing, jealousy, devotion, and heartbreak remained remarkably constant. Medieval lovers felt the same flutter of excitement at receiving a token of affection, the same agony of separation from beloved partners, the same joy in finding understanding and companionship with another person. Their letters reveal emotions that any modern reader would immediately recognise and empathise with, despite the vastly different circumstances that shaped their expression. Perhaps most remarkably, many medieval marriages that began as practical arrangements developed into genuine partnerships characterised by deep affection and mutual respect. The human capacity for love proved capable of flourishing even within the most restrictive social frameworks, suggesting that the fundamental drive for emotional connection transcends specific cultural practices and historical circumstances. The medieval period's emphasis on community involvement in romantic relationships offers interesting perspectives on modern, individualistic approaches to dating. While medieval community oversight could be intrusive and limiting, it also provided support systems and relationship guidance that many contemporary couples lack. The medieval understanding that successful marriages required more than just romantic attraction, that they needed practical compatibility, family support, and shared values, contains wisdom relevant to any era. The elaborate courtship rituals and symbolic communications of medieval romance created opportunities for emotional intimacy and intellectual connection that our more direct modern approaches sometimes miss. The art of letter writing, the language of symbolic gifts, and the patient development of relationships over extended periods allowed couples to know each other deeply before making permanent commitments. As we reflect on medieval love in all its complexity, the passionate poetry and practical arrangements, the tragic scandals and successful partnerships, the individual desires and social necessities, we're reminded that romance has always been one of humanity's most powerful and persistent forces. In every whispered poem and stolen glance, in every carefully negotiated marriage contract and secret midnight meeting, in every letter preserved across centuries and every legend passed down through generations, the human heart found ways to speak its eternal language of love, hope, and connection. The medieval period teaches us that love finds expression within whatever circumstances exist, that romance adapts to social structures while sometimes transcending them, and that the search for understanding, companionship, and emotional fulfillment remains one of humanity's most enduring and universal experiences. Whether in castle halls or peasant cottages, whether in arranged marriages or forbidden affairs, whether in letters written by candlelight or songs sung by wandering minstrels, love in the Middle Ages proves that the human heart has always known how to hope, how to dream, and how to find light even in the darkest of times. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of medieval romance. Until next time, this has been History Tales, where the past comes alive through the stories that shaped our world.